She was 22 and cast out before breakfast, with the screen door latched behind her and the red clay of Levy County still damp on her shoes. No bedroom, no supper promised, just her granny's blackened cane skimmer wrapped in a flour sack and $4 she had earned washing jars behind a roadside barbecue stand outside Chiefland. And with that $4, she bought a forgotten Florida cracker cane mill on a sand road off County Road 347 near Otter Creek, in a stretch of scrub and live oak that had not smelled sorghum smoke since 1978. The roof sagged like a tired hat. The mule sweep lay half swallowed by wiregrass. But what nobody knew was that hidden beneath the brick arch of the old boiling furnace was something that would change her life forever. Before we go on, if you love stories like these, take a moment and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from tonight. We love to see how far these stories travel. She had grown up with the smell of cane juice before she knew the names of colors. It was green and raw when it first ran from the rollers, grassy as a field cut open, with a white foam at the top, and a sweetness that did not yet know what it wanted to become. In the fall, when the mornings came cool over the palmettos and the cattle egrets stood white in the wet ditches, her grandmother, Lovey Bell Tyndall, would set the long iron kettle over oak coals and make the whole yard breathe sugar. Lovey Bell called it cooking down, never making syrup. Making sounded too proud. Cooking down sounded like what it was. You took what the land gave you tall and watery, and you stayed with it until the excess left, until the green went amber, until the steam lost its sharpness and turned soft, until one drop from the skimmer held its shape long enough to shine. Mara Tyndall learned to stand back from the kettle before she learned to read. She learned that boiling sugar could burn worse than boiling water. She learned that cane knives were laid flat, never edge up. She learned that a mule remembered a path better than most men remembered a promise. And she learned that her grandmother could hear a batch turn before anyone else could see it. The old place had not belonged to them when Mara was a child. It belonged to the county by then, or to the idea of the county, which was to say it belonged to mildew, vines, wasps, and the memory of old families who had moved north or died out. But Lovey Bell carried a key to the syrup house in the pocket of her apron, tied to a blue thread, and every November she walked Mara down the sand road as if she were going to church. The cane mill sat in a hollow of longleaf pine and turkey oak, with a low tin-roofed shed, a brick furnace blackened by decades of smoke, a cypress cooling table, and a rusted three-roller mill that had once been turned by mule power. There was no grandness to it. The walls were rough boards, the floor was packed earth, the chimney leaned a little east. Yet when Lovey Bell stepped inside, she lowered her voice. The first of those hands had belonged to Silas Tyndall, Mara's great-great-grandfather, though nobody in the family agreed whether he came down from Georgia in 1894 or 1896. The ledger would later settle it, but by then the argument had already become part of the telling. Silas had been a thin man with a fox-colored beard and one good boot, a cracker farmer who could split cypress shingles, shoe a mule, smoke mullet, dig a well, and make a poor patch of land feed 7 people if the rain did not turn cruel. He built the cane shed in 1903 after a freeze killed his oranges and left him with cane standing green in a field that had been meant for something else. His neighbors said cane was poor man's comfort. Silas said comfort was not poor if it kept children through winter. He hauled limestone for the furnace, cut pine for the rafters, and set the mill where a mule could walk a clean circle under the shade. He planted green cane, ribbon cane, and a little purple cane from a Seminole trader who passed through Cedar Key with baskets and a quiet face. They came because Silas did not scorch a batch. They came because his syrup held the taste of cane without the bitterness of haste. They came because his wife, Adeline, kept a record of every gallon, every family, every debt, paid in eggs or rope or a ham shoulder. In time, the mill became less a business than a meeting place. Men brought cane in wagons, women traded seed, children dipped splinters in foam and burned their tongues. The poor paid late, the grieving paid never. Silas wrote them down anyway. By the time Mara was born, Silas and Adeline were names in a Bible with pressed chinaberry leaves between the pages. But Lovey Bell made them present. She spoke of Silas when she sharpened a cane knife against a stone. She spoke of Adeline when she tied muslin over cooling jars. She spoke of the old ledger as if it were a living witness, though she had not seen it since she was a girl. Your people were not rich, Lovey Bell told Mara. They were useful. There is a difference. Mara was 8 when she was first allowed to skim foam from the kettle. She held the long-handled skimmer with both hands and trembled under its weight while Lovey Bell stood behind her, one palm between the child's shoulder blades. The foam came up pale and dirty-looking, full of green flecks and dust, and Mara wanted to scrape it away fast. Lovey Bell stopped her. Slow hands, child. You're not fighting it. You're clearing it. By 12, Mara could feed the furnace without choking the fire. She knew which oak splits gave steady heat and which pine knots flared too hot. She could tell when a kettle needed a breath and when it needed a push. She could carry empty jars 2 by 2 and full jars 1 at a time. She learned to wipe the rims clean because sweetness invited ants and carelessness invited mold. By 15, she could walk the cane row and choose stalks by feel. Too young, and the juice was thin. Too old, and the joint turned dry. She learned to cut low near the root, strip the blades, top the stalk, and stack it with the cut ends facing the same way. Lovey Bell made her do it again if the pile looked ragged. Cane has already stood through heat for you, she said. Do not lay it down ugly. By 18, Mara could cook a small batch alone while her grandmother sat in a cane chair under the chinaberry tree, one ankle swollen, one hand folded over the other, pretending not to watch. Mara did not ask for praise. Praise made Lovey Bell narrow her eyes. Instead, when the syrup sheeted from the dipper and held a brown shine in the last light, Lovey Bell rose, came to the kettle, tasted one cooled drop, and nodded once. There were 3 rules Lovey Bell taught her, and they were simple enough for a child to repeat and hard enough for a grown woman to live by. The first was, never hurry the boil. A fast fire could make the kettle leap and the foam rise pretty, but underneath that noise, the sugar would turn against you. It would catch on the iron, darken at the edges, and carry a bitter note all the way into the jar. Patience was not softness. Patience was control. You held the heat where the work could happen. The second was, skim what rises, but do not curse the field for it. Cane grew in sand and rain and insect weather. It carried leaf dust, ash, and the little bitter things all living stems collect. The scum that rose was not a failure. It was proof the boiling was doing its work. You took it off cleanly again and again until the surface cleared. The third was, leave some sweetness for somebody coming behind you. Lovey Bell said a syrup maker who scraped every pan dry had missed the point. A spoonful for a neighbor, a jar for a sick room, a piece of cane for a child, a cutting saved for next season. Sweetness that did not travel turned heavy in the hand. Sweetness passed on stayed alive. Then Lovey Bell began to fail. It started with jars left unlabeled. Then the firewood stacked green side in. Then, one November morning, Mara found the kettle cold, and her grandmother sitting beside it in her good dress, saying she had been waiting on Silas to bring the mule around. The doctor used words that sounded like doors closing. Lovey Bell answered him politely and kept a peppermint in her cheek. For 2 years, Mara came before work and after work. She washed sheets. She paid small bills with smaller money. She cooked grits thin when swallowing was hard. On good days, Lovey Bell remembered the old mill and asked whether the chimney still leaned east. On bad days, she called Mara Adeline and asked if the syrup had been drawn off yet. The last task Lovey Bell left unfinished was a tray of clean jars on a pine table. Mara found them the evening after the funeral, 12 jars upside down on a towel, waiting to be filled by a batch that would not be cooked. The house was full of church flowers and murmuring relatives. Mara slipped into the kitchen, set the jars upright, and wiped each rim though they were already clean. She did not cry. She folded the towel into a square and put the blackened skimmer in her bag. After the burial, everything thinned. The little house had been mortgaged twice by Mara's father, once for a truck and once for a dream that had the shape of a bait shop and the lifespan of a mayfly. Her stepmother said there was no room now, not with the estate unsettled and feelings raw. Her father stood by the sink and looked at the floor. Mara packed one paper sack and one canvas bag. From the kitchen drawer, she took the skimmer, still dark at the bowl from years of cane foam, and nobody stopped her. By morning she was behind the barbecue stand, washing sauce jars in water gone pink from smoke and tomato. The owner paid cash at the end of the week. $4 remained after she bought a biscuit, a bottle of aspirin, and a thrift store sweater with one missing button. She slept 2 nights on a church pew until the pastor's wife found her and made a pallet in the fellowship hall. Mara thanked her with the careful voice of someone trying not to become a burden. If this story is keeping you company tonight, subscribing helps these stories find the next listener. And tell us in the comments, was there ever a small craft in your family that someone tended for years, something quiet that still feels warm in your hands? The notice was taped inside the Levy County Courthouse, low on the bulletin board between a lost dog flyer and a public meeting announcement. County surplus property, sealed bid, former cane mill parcel, Otter Creek District, minimum bid $4, structure unsafe, buyer assumes all risk. Mara read it 3 times before she understood the place on the paper was the place in her bones. At the clerk's window, a man named Mr. Alford lifted his eyes when she said Tyndall. He went still in the old way. People go still when a name has crossed a long bridge. He said his mother had carried cane to that mill in a wagon and that Lovey Bell had once brought syrup to his house when fever took his little brother. The key had been kept in a drawer for 28 years. Mr. Alford laid it on the counter with the folded deed paper, iron dark against government green, and Mara placed 4 $1 bills beside it. He pushed the key toward her and said, "That old place has been waiting longer than you have." She walked there the same afternoon. Mara stopped at the gate. The cane mill had weathered smaller in memory and larger in grief. The tin roof had peeled back at one corner. One wall leaned outward as if listening. The mule sweep lay on the ground, its heart pine beam silvered almost white, with a young oak growing through the circle where hooves had gone round and round for generations. The brick furnace still stood, though vines laced the chimney, and a wild grape root had shouldered into the mortar. At the door, the county key fought her. She worked it gently, not wanting to snap old iron in old iron. When the lock turned, the sound was small, but it seemed to move through the trees. Mara set the skimmer on the cooling table. Not in a way anyone else would have seen. No beam of light broke open, no ghost spoke, but the blackened bowl of that skimmer, laid on that cypress board, made a line between the living hand and the waiting place. Mara stood with both palms flat on the table and listened to the quiet until her breathing slowed. Then she saw the brick. It was not loose. That would have been too easy. It was wrong. One brick at the base of the furnace arch sat a finger width proud of the others, and its edge was cleaner, as if someone had touched it many times after the rest had gone to soot. Mara crouched and brushed away ash with her sleeve. The mortar around it was not mortar at all, but clay darkened with smoke. She fetched the broken jug neck from outside and used it like a scraper. The clay came away in crumbs. Her fingers blackened. A roach fled. The brick shifted after 10 minutes, then after 20, then came forward into her hands with a soft sigh of old grit. Behind it was a narrow hollow. At first, she saw only darkness. She took the jar of water from her sack, drank, and then held the glass in the doorway light to throw a weak shine into the gap. Something inside answered amber. Not bright gold, not treasure as children draw it. A low, patient gleam wrapped in oilcloth. Mara widened the opening 1 brick at a time. The hollow ran beneath the furnace arch, cool and dry because Silas had built better than the county had guessed. Inside lay a cypress box no longer than her forearm, a rolled leather packet, 3 small cloth bags tied with waxed cord, a record book wrapped in feed sack, and a sealed envelope gone brown at the edges. There was also a bundle of cane cuttings, impossible and dry, each one labeled in ink, green ribbon, purple Seminole, yellow home cane, Adeline's choice. Mara lifted the box first. It was heavier than wood had any right to be. Inside were coins, not many, but enough to still the breath. $20 gold pieces, $10 eagles, and a handful of silver halves lay under a folded square of linen. They had not been polished. They had slept. Later, a coin dealer in Gainesville would value them at $46,700, not because they were magical, but because old gold kept dry and uncleaned carries its own stubborn witness. The leather packet held tools, a small draw knife for shaving cane joints, a whetstone worn hollow in the middle, a brass hydrometer in a tin tube, a narrow thermometer with the numbers still legible, a syrup gauge hand-marked by Silas Tyndall, with tiny notches cut beside the printed scale. These were not rich things. They were master things. They had belonged to hands that expected someone to know what they meant. The record book was Adeline's. Mara knew it before she opened the cover because the name was written there in a woman's strong, right-leaning hand. Adeline Tyndall, cane and syrup accounts, 1903. The pages smelled of dust and dry molasses. Names filled them: gallons, quarts, weather, frost dates, births, deaths, debts forgiven. Beside one entry, Adeline had written, "Widow parish paid with 3 hens and 1 song. Account settled." Beside another, "Fever at Alford Place, syrup sent, no charge." Mara sat on the packed earth and read until the light shifted. Then she opened the envelope. The paper inside had been folded twice and sealed against damp with wax. The ink had browned, but the words were clear enough. Mara held it in both hands, and because the empty syrup house seemed to ask for sound, she read it aloud. "To whoever finds this after we are gone, if you have opened the furnace, then either the place is in danger or the right hands have come back to it. I am Silas E. Tyndall, son of poor ground and stubborn weather, and I built this mill with my wife Adeline in the year of our Lord 1903, after the freeze took the orange trees and left us wondering what sweetness was still allowed to remain. The coins in this box are not buried for greed. They are what we saved in good years and did not spend in vain years. If the land is being sold away from the family, use them to bring it home. If the land is already home, use them to keep the kettle boiling for those who cannot pay." The book is Adeline's hand. Trust it more than any man's memory. It will tell you who came here hungry, who came proud, who paid late, who paid in labor, and who carried sorrow under a clean shirt. Do not shame a name written in that book. A debt forgiven by Adeline stays forgiven. The tools are plain, but plain tools are enough when the hand is taut. Keep the fire low until the juice clears. Skim what rises without anger. Draw off before bitterness enters. Save cane for planting, syrup for winter, and kindness for the day you believe you have none left. If you are young and alone when you find this, do not mistake loneliness for abandonment. Some places wait longer than people can. Some work, sleeps until a granddaughter or a stranger has need of it. Stand where we stood. Cook down what is thin. Leave sweetness behind you. Signed in faith and smoke, Silas E. Tyndall, cane grower and syrup maker, Otter Creek, Florida, November 14, 1921. Mara did not cry. She folded the letter along its old lines, placed it back on the linen, and put both hands on the cold brick of the furnace. Then she did the one thing her grandmother would have done before wonder, before fear, before any counting of money. She cleaned. By dark, she had no plan large enough for what she had found, but she had rules. The next morning, she walked to town with the record book wrapped in the flour sack and the coins hidden under biscuits in her paper bag. Mr. Alford sent her to a lawyer who had once eaten Lovey Bell's cane syrup on hoe cakes and still remembered the taste. The lawyer sent her to an appraiser in Gainesville who handled the coins with cotton gloves and spoke more softly after the third one. $46,700, he said, perhaps more at auction, but that was the number he could stand behind. Mara heard the figure and looked out the window at the traffic on University Avenue. The restoration went slowly, because old places punish hurry. People began to come before she asked them. Mrs. Cora Alford came first, carrying a coffee can of cane seed wrapped in damp paper towels. She was 81, narrow as a broom handle, and said her mother had saved the strain because Lovey Bell once told her never to let good cane vanish from laziness. She did not stay long. She set the can on the cooling table and touched the old skimmer with 2 fingers. That woman knew when syrup was ready, she said. 2 days later, Benji Parrish arrived in a pickup the color of pond water. He brought heart pine boards from a tobacco barn that had fallen in a storm. His grandfather's name was in Adeline's ledger, with 3 hens and 1 song beside it. Benji had never heard that story. Mara showed him the page. He stood with his cap in his hands and read the line twice. "I reckon we still owe for the song," he said. By the first cold morning of November, a small patch of cane stood stripped and ready beside the shed. It was not enough for commerce, it was enough for beginning. Mara fed stalks into the restored mill while Benji's old mule, borrowed for the day, walked the sweep with the grave patience of an animal entering a story older than itself. The juice ran green into the pan. She built the fire low. The first foam rose ugly and pale. Mara skimmed it without anger. The kettle settled. Steam climbed into the rafters and found old soot there. The smell changed by degrees, from field to cut grass, from cut grass to warm stalk, from warm stalk to something rounder, darker, almost bread-like at the edge. People came and went quietly. No one rushed her. No one told her it was ready. Near dusk, the syrup began to sheet from the dipper. Mara held it up. Amber fell in a slow ribbon, caught the last light through the open wall, and for 1 second, the whole kettle looked as if the sun had been boiled down and persuaded to stay. She drew off before bitterness entered. She filled 12 jars. On the first lid she wrote, "Lovey Bell Batch, Otter Creek Mill, November." Then she took a spoonful outside and poured it at the root of the wild cane clump by the wet place. Not for ghosts, not exactly. For coming behind. In spring, Mara planted cane in straight rows. In summer, she learned how much heat a field could hold and still not die. In September, storms bent the cane and left it shining. In October, she cut the first full harvest with 3 neighbors, 2 borrowed knives, and a boy from the high school who said he needed volunteer hours and stayed because he liked the mule. The mill woke by repetition. Not all at once. Never all at once. The roof stopped leaking. The furnace drew clean. The cooling table took oil and shone. The road packed under tires. A sign went up beside County Road 347, hand-painted cream letters on brown board, Tyndall Cane Mill, syrup cooked down in season. Under it, in smaller letters, Mara painted 3 lines. Never hurry the boil. Skim what rises, leave sweetness behind. Years later, when visitors asked what stunned her most, she did not say gold. She did not say the exact appraisal number, though people leaned forward for it. She did not even say Silas's letter, though she had copied it in her own hand and could recite it almost whole. She said it was the first batch, because when her granny's old skimmer moved through the foam, when the field dust rose and cleared, when the thin green juice darkened into amber under a low, patient fire, Mara understood what Lovey Bell had been boiling down all those years. Not cane only. Not sorrow only. Not poverty or pride or all the things a family survives without naming. She had been boiling down time until it could be poured, and maybe that is why the old mill waited. It waited through vines and rust, through storms, through the years when nobody wanted to bother with cane because sugar came cheaper in sacks and life came faster on screens. It waited for a young woman with nowhere to sleep, a skimmer wrapped in flour cloth, and $4 folded in her palm. It waited for somebody who would not mistake a ruined place for a useless one. Mara Tyndall was 22 and cast out before breakfast. She had no bedroom, no supper promised, just her granny's blackened cane skimmer and $4 from washing jars behind a barbecue stand. She walked to a forgotten Florida cracker cane mill on a sand road off County Road 347 and put every dollar she had on the counter. She had $4 to her name, and she spent it on a cane mill. It was the best $4 she ever spent. If this story found a quiet place in you, leave a comment with the old trade, recipe, tool, or saying someone in your family passed down. And until the next story, be gentle with what is still cooking down in your own life. See you in the last warm light of the day.